Hello everyone, Professor Kurzlook here. So let's dig into, let's dig a little deeper into one of the most fundamental features of the American political system, which is federalism. Hopefully by the end of this video, by the end of this lecture, you should have a clearer sense of what federalism is, why the framers of the Constitution chose it, and how it continues to shape politics in the U.S. today. We know that federalism is important, it plays a role. Let's dig a little deeper into what it is. So we know that federalism is a form of government where authority is divided between two levels, the national government and subnational governments, which in the US is our states. Unlike a unitary system where power is centralized or a confederation where states dominate, federalism balances both levels. Each can act directly on people in certain areas. Think of it as a building compromise, strong enough to bind the nation together, but flexible enough to preserve state power. So we talked about the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation when you didn't have a strong enough centralized authority. Shays' Rebellion showed what could happen. You didn't have a unified force to put down an uprising. But whereas with a unitary system, not all decisions are coming out and emanating from a central federalized source. So this gives some power to the state while the federal government still has some power and actually a lot of power, but states also have a lot of power. So we see that it is this compromise between too strong of a centralized authority and not too strong of just states controlling everything and then having what we saw with the Articles of Confederation. So when we think of the benefits of federalism, one of the key strengths of federalism is its encouragement of innovation. This idea of laboratories of democracy, which I say a lot, these ideas of laboratories of democracy. States experiment with policies, and if they work, other states or even the federal government might adopt those policies. So women's suffrage started at the state level, as did early environmental regulations. The Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, which we associate with the Democrats, grew out of Massachusetts. So we see that these ideas of laboratories of democracy, minimum wage policies, let's see if something works here and then can other states implement it? Can other localities, municipalities, townships, can the national level implement those policies? So when we think of benefits of federalism, that's one of the issues that people normally point to. Hey, look, we have these laboratories of democracy. But of course, federalism, like any public policy, like anything that's rooted in the Constitution or that has been constructed since, has drawbacks, and federalism has some as well. Different states have different resources and priorities, which creates disparities in education, healthcare, even income levels. Federal systems also create multiple bureaucracies, which can actually lead to inefficiencies, conflicts between levels of government. So in short, federalism can be flexible, and that's what's great about federalism. But it also can be messy. And when we encounter multiple layers of bureaucracy, that generates frustration, that comes to the forefront. So yeah, absolutely some perceived drawbacks. So let's think of some modern examples of federalism. So states and the federal government handle sports betting differently, marijuana legalization, gun laws, abortion, education, voting rolls. States and the federal level handle these differently. From state to state, they handle this differently. From state to the federal authorities, they all look very different depending on what state you're in. So absolutely. So let's see. When we also see federalism in courts and legislatures, the federal systems rely on courts to resolve conflicts. In the U.S., the Supreme Court often decides conflicts between state and national authority. States also have a voice in national policy making through the representatives and senators at the national level, ensuring state perspectives influence federal law. So your elected representatives can shape public policy at the local, at the state law, but they also then have a say at the federal level. So we know that federalism, as we said at the outset, is one way to organize power, but it is not the only way. Unitary systems, the central government dominates, and subnational units are basically administrators. In confederations, states hold most of the power and the central government is weak, like under the Articles of Confederation, which we talked about last week, which we saw in the reading. The U.S. has moved from confederation because it was weak. It was too weak to hold the country together. Remember, we used the example of the Articles of Confederation. So we know that federalism is grounded in the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8 lays out Congress's enumerated powers: collecting taxes, coin money, regulate commerce, declare war, and more. The Necessary and Powers Clause, sometimes called the Elastic Clause, expands this authority by allowing Congress to pass laws needed to carry out its powers. States, meanwhile, retain reserved powers under the 10th Amendment. But the Constitution also restricts state power. States can't coin money, they can't levy taxes, they can't levy tariffs. They can absolutely levy taxes. They can't levy taxes or make treaties. The Supremacy Clause ensures federal law trumps conflicting state law as long as the federal government is acting within its constitutional limits. Now, we see sometimes there's some contention there about what happens when states pass policies, pass laws that are contrary to federal law. And so then the courts, the Supreme Court, get involved. And then that's when we start to encounter it on the front page of the news. So federalism also shapes how governments raise and spend money. The federal government collects income and payroll taxes, while states rely more on income, property, and sales taxes. Importantly, states receive a lot of revenue from federal grants. Something else that we see a lot in the news today about how the Trump administration is changing grant programs. Because about 30% of state budgets come from federal grants. So there's discussion about how will states fill this void if those grants stop coming. That means Washington can actually influence state priorities through money. And so you'll, again, encounter this debate about how Washington can shape states' policy because of the grants. So throughout U.S. history, the balance between state and federal power has shifted. In the early 1800s, Supreme Court rulings like McLeod v. Maryland strengthened federal authority. The Civil War and its aftermath firmly established federal supremacy, especially on issues of slavery and civil rights. Later, dual federalism dominated. States and national government worked in separate spheres. The Great Depression brought cooperative federalism, with Washington and states working together on economic relief and social programs. In the 1970s and the 1980s, Nixon and Ronald Reagan pushed new federalism, trying to return power to the states. A discussion that we continue to hear today about more power being pushed back to the states away from federal authorities. So today, federalism plays out heavily in intergovernmental relations. The federal government uses grants to influence states. Categorical grants have strict conditions, while block grants offer more flexibility. Sometimes Washington also imposes unfunded mandates, forcing states to comply without giving them extra money. This leads to constant negotiation or tension between the two levels, at the federal level and the state level. So finally, think about how contested issues, immigration, same-sex marriage, marijuana legalization, each of these highlights how state and federal policies can conflict. Interest groups also have a way of shaping policy. So federalism means that there are multiple arenas to fight political battles, which is both empowering, complicated, and at times frustrating. So to wrap up, federalism is about shared and divided authority between national and state governments. It fosters innovation, but it can also lead to inequality of outcomes. It adapts to crises, court rulings, and politics, meaning it's never static. It never stays the same. So as you continue to think about examples of federalism, think of this as a framework, a guiding framework. Okay, so thank you for watching to the end. As we'll see, as we saw, there are many different examples of federalism between states and between states and the federal government. How states handle issues is oftentimes quite different. So it could be a state and a state, it could be a municipality, it could be one city from even only 15 miles away. So federalism impacts all of our lives. Okay, thank you.